I'm Jason, 21 male. I live in a small town where most people's ambitions stretch only as far as the county line, but my dreams have always been aimed at the stars. I'm a final year student on the cusp of becoming an aerospace engineer, a goal I've worked toward my entire life. This story is about how the biggest opportunity of my life was almost destroyed by the man who was supposed to be my family, my stepfather, Mark. It's a story about a hidden passport, a shattered trust, and a quiet revenge that was years in the making. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For as long as I can remember, I've been obsessed with space. Not in a casual, isn't that neat kind of way, but in a way that shaped my entire existence. While other kids were collecting sports cards, I was collecting articles about NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. My walls weren't covered in posters of bands, but with detailed schematics of the Saturn V rocket and high-resolution images from the Hubble telescope. My dream wasn't just a job, it was a calling. I wanted to build the machines that would carry humanity to new worlds. This ambition was the engine that drove me through late-night study sessions, complex calculus problems, and every challenge that university threw at me. And finally, the ultimate opportunity had arrived, the Sterling Fellowship. The Sterling Fellowship wasn't just a scholarship, it was a golden ticket. It offered a fully funded master's program at one of the world's leading aerospace engineering universities in Germany, followed by a guaranteed research position. It was the kind of life-changing chance that only comes around once. Getting to the final interview stage felt like docking with the International Space Station, a complex, delicate maneuver that had taken years of preparation. The interview was scheduled for Friday morning via a video conference with a panel of esteemed professors and engineers. But there was a catch. As part of the verification process, I had to present my physical passport to the camera at the beginning of the call. A simple, bureaucratic step, but an absolutely essential one. My home life was a quiet, delicate ecosystem. My dad passed away when I was 10 and my mom, Helen, remarried a few years later. Mark was solid, that's the best word for him. He was a construction foreman, a man who believed in concrete foundations, calloused hands, and the value of a hard day's work. He provided for us, and for that I was grateful. But he never understood my dreams. To him, engineering was about building bridges and roads, things you could see and touch right here in our town. Aerospace was a fantasy, a frivolous waste of a good mind that could be used for something practical. All that book learning for a job that's out in the clouds, he'd grumble, not unkindly but with a tone of paternal disappointment. There's good money in local contracting, Jay, real work for real people. He saw my ambition not as a strength, but as a rejection of the simple, grounded life he valued. My mom, a gentle soul who worked as an admin at the local elementary school, was caught in the middle. She was proud of me, I knew she was, but she hated conflict. She acted as a buffer, smoothing over Mark's comments and encouraging me in hushed tones as if my dreams were a secret to be kept. He just worries about you, she'd say, which was her way of saying, please don't rock the boat. The only person who truly got it was my best friend Maya. We'd known each other since kindergarten, and she was as driven as I was, just in a different field. While I looked to the stars, she looked to the code that ran the world. She was a brilliant computer science major who saw the world in logic and algorithms. She was my sounding board, my reality check, and my biggest cheerleader. Don't listen to him, she told me over the phone the week before the interview. Mark's world is 5 square miles. Your world is 197 million. He can't comprehend that, and it scares him. In the days leading up to the interview, a nervous energy filled our house. I spent hours in my room, running through practice questions, researching the panel members, and making sure my suit was perfectly pressed. I triple-checked my internet connection and the software for the video call. I laid out every document I would need on my desk. My acceptance letter to the final round, my academic transcripts, my portfolio of projects, and most importantly, my passport. I remember placing it right next to my laptop on Tuesday night, a small, dark blue book that represented my ticket to the future. I felt a surge of excitement every time I looked at it. On Wednesday evening, Mark came home from work and saw my setup. He leaned against the doorframe of my room, his arms crossed over. His thick chest, quite the operation you got going on here, he said, his voice a low rumble. You really think this Germany thing is going to happen? I hope so, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. It's the final interview, I have a good shot. He just grunted, a sound that could mean anything. Your mom mentioned they're looking for an assistant project manager down at the Henderson construction firm. Solid career path, good benefits, something to think about, as a backup. He was always presenting these local opportunities, these anchors meant to moor me to this town. It was his way of trying to steer me back to a path he understood, a path he could control. I just nodded politely, not wanting to start an argument. Thanks, Mark, I'll keep it in mind. But we both knew I wouldn't. My mind was already thousands of miles away in a lecture hall in Germany sketching out designs for a Mars lander. As he walked away, I felt that familiar, quiet tension settle over me again. It was the feeling that my dream wasn't just my own personal challenge. It was a silent battle being fought within the walls of my own home. I took a deep breath and turned back to my notes, pushing his words out of my mind. The future was too close to let his doubt cloud it now. Thursday, T-minus 24 hours until the interview. I woke up with a knot of nervous excitement in my stomach. I had a clear plan for the day, a final review of my notes in the morning, a mock interview with Maya in the afternoon, and then a relaxing evening to clear my head. The first thing I did after getting dressed was walk to my desk to do a final check of my documents. Transcripts check, portfolio check, letter check, passport. My eyes scanned the neat stack of papers. It wasn't there. I felt a small prickle of annoyance, not panic. I was meticulously organized. I must have moved it. I checked the drawer where I usually kept it, not there. I looked around my desk again, then on the bookshelf, then under the stack of textbooks on my floor. Nothing. The prickle of annoyance started to grow into a cold seed of dread. I began a more systematic search, pulling books off the shelf one by one, shaking them out. I emptied my backpack, checked the pockets of the jeans I'd worn the day before. Still nothing. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was not happening, not now. My mom was in the kitchen, humming along to the radio as she made coffee. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "have you seen my passport, the blue one? I left it on my desk." She turned, her smile fading when she saw my face. "No, sweetie, I haven't been in your room. Are you sure you know where you left it?" "I'm positive," I said, my voice rising slightly. "It was right next to my laptop. I saw it last night before I went to bed." "Well, it has to be somewhere," she said with that placating tone she always used when she didn't want a situation to escalate. "We'll find it, don't worry." Together, we went back to my room and essentially tore it apart. We looked under the bed, behind the dresser, through every drawer and every box in my closet. Mark walked by on his way to the garage, a thermos in his hand. "What's all the commotion?" he asked. "Jason can't find his passport," my mom said, her voice strained. Mark leaned against the doorframe, a familiar posture. "Probably just misplaced it, kid. You've got a lot on your mind. It'll turn up when you stop looking for it." He said it so casually, with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if I'd merely lost my keys. There was no concern in his voice, no offer to help, just a placid, unbothered assurance that I was being dramatic. His calmness felt jarringly out of place with the frantic energy coursing through me. I shot him a look, but he was already turning to leave. Got an early start at the site, good luck finding it, and then he was gone. The morning devolved into a blur of frantic searching. We checked the living room, the kitchen, even the laundry room on the off chance it had fallen into a hamper. My mom's initial calm was cracking, her movements becoming more jerky and her reassurances sounding increasingly hollow. "It has to be here, Jason. It couldn't have just walked away." By noon, the house was a wreck and my hope was beginning to fray. Panic was setting in, cold and suffocating. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a potential catastrophe. Without that passport, the interview couldn't happen. The Sterling Fellowship, my entire future, would be gone before I even had a chance to fight for it. The injustice of it was a physical weight in my chest. All those years of work, all that sacrifice, undone by a missing booklet. I felt a surge of helpless anger. How could I have been so careless? I'd guarded that passport like a holy relic, and now, on the one day it truly mattered, it was gone. I called Maya, my voice shaking. "I can't find it," I said, the words barely coming out. "Maya. I've looked everywhere, it's gone." "Okay, Jason, breathe," she said, her voice a calm anchor in my storm of panic. "Just breathe, let's think logically. Where did you last see it, exactly?" "On my desk, Tuesday night. I haven't touched it since." "And no one else has been in your room?" "Just Mom and me searching, and Mark, he poked his head in this morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice careful. "Just the usual stuff, that I'd misplaced it, that it would turn up. He didn't seem to care at all." As I said the words out loud, a strange feeling washed over me. Mark's complete lack of concern, his casual dismissal. It wasn't just unhelpful, it felt intentional. A shadow of a thought, dark and ugly, began to form in the back of my mind. It was a thought so monstrous I immediately tried to push it away. He wouldn't, he couldn't. Mark was frustrating and controlling, but he wasn't malicious. He wouldn't sabotage my future, would he? The seed of dread in my gut began to feel colder, heavier, and it was no longer about my own carelessness. It was about something far more sinister. The shadow of doubt wasn't about where the passport was anymore. It was about who might have taken it. The afternoon was a nightmare. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to the death of my dream. My mom had sunk into a state of quiet despair, sitting at the kitchen table and staring blankly at the wall, murmuring, "I just don't understand where it could have gone." Her helplessness only fueled my own. The initial adrenaline of the search had worn off, replaced by a thick, suffocating fog of panic. I paced my room like a caged animal, my mind racing through impossible scenarios. Maybe it had fallen into the trash. I had already sifted through the kitchen garbage bag, an act of desperation that yielded nothing but coffee grounds and a profound sense of humiliation. My conversation with Maya kept replaying in my head, her pointed question about Mark, his casual, almost smug demeanor that morning, the memory of him standing in my doorway talking about a backup plan at the local construction firm. It all started to coalesce into a deeply unsettling picture. I had always seen Mark's opposition to my dream as a form of misguided concern, a father figure trying to protect his stepson from disappointment. But what if it wasn't about protection? What if it was about control? The thought was so vile that I felt a wave of nausea. This was Mark, the man who'd taught me how to change a tire, the man who'd coached my little league team. He was family. Accusing him, even in my own mind, felt like a betrayal. But the alternative, that the passport had simply vanished into thin air, was impossible. Someone had to have moved it. And besides my mom, who was clearly as distraught as I was, the only other person with easy access to my room was Mark. I had to know. I couldn't let this suspicion fester without proof. I needed to search his things. The idea felt invasive, a violation of trust, but what trust was left to violate if he had done this to me? I waited until my mom went to lie down, a headache blooming from the stress of the day. The house was quiet. Mark wouldn't be home from work for another 3 hours. I had a window. My heart pounded in my chest as I walked into my parents' bedroom. It felt like crossing a sacred line. Mark's side of the room was neat and orderly, just like him. His clothes were folded in perfect squares in his drawers, his shoes lined up in the closet. I started with his bedside table, my hands trembling as I slid the drawer open. Nothing but receipts, a pair of reading glasses, and some loose change. I checked his work clothes, the pockets of his heavy canvas jackets. Nothing. I felt a flicker of relief mixed with frustration. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just being paranoid, driven to wild conclusions by stress. I was about to give up when I saw it, tucked away in the back corner of his closet, his golf bag. Mark loved golf. It was his one real hobby, his escape. He went every Saturday morning with his friends from the construction site. It was the one place that was exclusively his, a symbol of his life outside of this house. It was the last place I would have thought to look, and perhaps that was the point. With a deep, steadying breath, I pulled the heavy bag out into the light. It was full of clubs, balls, and tees. I unzipped the main pocket, my fingers fumbling with the zipper. Inside was a windbreaker, a box of golf balls, and a leather glove. I felt around the bottom, my heart sinking. Nothing. I moved to the side pockets. The first one held a scorecard and a pencil. The second one held a small bag of teas and something else, something made of paper. My fingers closed around it and I pulled it out. It was a glossy, trifold brochure. The bold letters on the front read, "Northridge Community College, build your future close to home." My blood ran cold. Northridge was the local college, the one Mark was always talking up. "They have a great trades program," he'd say. "You could get a degree in construction management, be set for life right here." I opened the brochure with numb fingers. Inside, tucked neatly into the centerfold, was a small, dark blue booklet. My passport. I stared at it, unable to process what I was seeing. It was real. It was here. But the relief was instantly swallowed by a tidal wave of ice-cold fury. It wasn't just that he had taken it. It was the way he had hidden it, placed inside a brochure for the future he wanted for me, a future he was actively trying to engineer by sabotaging the one I wanted for myself. This wasn't a misguided act of protection. This was a calculated, deliberate act of sabotage. The panic that had suffocated me all day transformed into a clarity so sharp it hurt. I saw everything: his constant undermining, his dismissive comments, his feigned concern. It was all part of a campaign to keep me here, to clip my wings and keep me in the cage he'd built for me. I stood there in the silence of his closet, the passport in one hand and the brochure in the other. He hadn't just hidden a document. He had hidden it with a message, a clear, undeniable message that my dreams were worthless and his plans were the only ones that mattered. In that moment, the image I had of Mark as a gruff but caring stepfather shattered completely. All I could see was a petty, controlling man who was so terrified of me leaving that he was willing to destroy my future to prevent it. The unseen sabotage was now in plain sight, and the betrayal was deeper and more painful than I could have ever imagined. Holding the passport and the brochure felt like holding the two opposing sides of my life. One represented a future of infinite possibility, of stars and equations and distant horizons. The other represented a future of confinement, of being tethered to a small town and a small man's small ambitions. The fury that had ignited in me didn't burn out, it cooled into something harder, something more focused. My immediate instinct was to storm downstairs, throw the evidence in his face, and scream. I wanted to see the look on his face when he knew he'd been caught. I wanted my mom to see what kind of man she was married to. But I stopped myself. What would that accomplish? Mark would deny it. He'd lie, twist the story, and claim I'd put it there myself. He'd call me hysterical, ungrateful. Look at him, he'd say to my mom, so desperate to blame someone else for his own carelessness. My mom, who avoided conflict at all costs, would be caught in the crossfire. She would want to believe me, but she would also want peace. The situation would devolve into a messy, unresolved family drama, and in the chaos, my interview tomorrow morning would become an afterthought. He would still win. I needed to think. I quietly put the golf bag back in its place, slipped the passport and brochure into my pocket and walked out of the room, my mind a whirlwind of strategy. I went to my room, locked the door, and immediately called Maya. I found it, I said, my voice low and tight. Oh my God, Jason, where was it? The relief in her voice was palpable. I took a deep breath, in Mark's golf bag, tucked inside a brochure for Northridge Community College. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end, then all she said was, that son of a… She didn't need to finish the sentence. Okay, she continued, her tone shifting from relieved friend to logical strategist. Okay, do not confront him, not yet, he'll just deny everything, we need to be smart about this. What do I do, Maya? I want to explode. I know, but rage is a bad advisor, she said, her voice firm. Right now, your only priority is that interview, you have your passport, that's the first victory. The next step is to make sure nothing else can go wrong, and after that, we make sure he can never do something like this again. Her clarity cut through my anger. She was right. A shouting match would give him power. I needed to take that power back quietly and completely. We talked for an hour, and as we did, other pieces started falling into place. I started connecting the dots, seeing a pattern of behavior that I had previously dismissed as simple grumpiness or overprotectiveness. I remembered the time a year ago when I'd applied for a summer internship at a tech company in California. I was a finalist, but I never heard back after the last interview. I'd assumed I just didn't get it. Mark had been particularly cheerful that week. See, plenty of good summer jobs right here, he'd said, pointing to a help-wanted ad for a local landscaping company. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Now I wondered, had he somehow intercepted an email, deleted a voicemail? It was impossible to prove, but the suspicion now felt chillingly plausible. Then Ray were the smaller things, the constant, subtle digs at my education. When are you going to be done with all this school and start earning a real living? The way he'd accidentally schedule family events or chores on days he knew I had a major exam to study for. The way he always praised my friends who had stayed local, gotten trade jobs, and started families, holding them up as the benchmark of success. Now, Timmy, he's a smart kid, he'd say about a guy who worked for him. Bought a house at 23, that's how you build a life. Every one of these instances had felt like a minor annoyance before. But now, viewed through the lens of the hidden passport, they formed a clear, undeniable mosaic of manipulation. This wasn't about my well-being, this was about his fear. My success, especially success that would take me far away, was a threat to his authority and his worldview. If I succeeded on my own terms, it meant that his narrow, practical way of life wasn't the only way. It meant he couldn't control my narrative. My mom's role in all of this also became clearer. She wasn't an accomplice, but her passivity had enabled him. Her desire for a peaceful home had created an environment where his controlling behavior could fester unchecked. She ran interference, she made excuses, but she never confronted him. She had taught me through her example to tiptoe around Mark's moods and his opinions. We had all been living in a system of his design, and I was the one who was trying to break out. He's been doing this for years, Maya, I said, the realization dawning on me with crushing weight. This is just the first time I have proof. Proof is everything, she replied, so what are we going to do with it? The anger I felt had now been forged into something else, resolve. This was no longer just about getting to my interview. It was about liberating myself from his influence for good. A simple confrontation wouldn't be enough. I needed to dismantle the illusion of the well-meaning, gruff but caring stepfather he had so carefully constructed. I needed to show my mom and perhaps even myself exactly who he was in a way that he couldn't deny or escape. The plan began to form in my mind, not of a loud, explosive revenge but a quiet, methodical one. I would use his own tactics against him, deception and control, to create a situation where the truth would be his undoing. The old Jason would have confronted Mark immediately, armed with righteous anger and the truth. But that Jason had been naive, believing that the truth alone was enough. The new Jason, the one who had stood in a silent closet holding his stolen future, knew better. Truth, when screamed, can be dismissed as noise. It needed to be presented calmly, clinically, and with undeniable evidence. Mark's power came from his ability to create doubt and paint me as the dramatic, ungrateful kid. My countermove had to eliminate any possibility of doubt. Maya and I spent the evening devising the plan. It had 3 phases. Phase 1, secure the interview. Phase 2, gather incontrovertible proof. Phase 3, the unveiling. Phase 1 was simple. I took my passport, the brochure, and every other essential document and put them in my backpack. That backpack was not leaving my side until the interview was over. I would sleep with it if I had to. The sense of security from having my passport back was immense, a weight lifted from my soul. I spent the next couple of hours doing a final, focused review for my interview. My mind was sharper now, fueled by adrenaline and a burning desire to succeed, not just for myself, but as an act of defiance against Mark. Phase 2 was the delicate part. I needed more than just the passport and the brochure. That was my word against his. He could claim he found it and was waiting for the right time to give it back. I needed him to admit what he did, preferably on tape. "We need to bait him," Maya said over our video call, her face illuminated by her monitor. "We need to create a scenario where he feels comfortable enough to confess, or at least to reveal his motives." Our plan was this: I would tell my mom that I'd found the passport. I'd lie and say it had fallen behind my dresser. This was crucial. It would lower Mark's guard. He would assume I'd bought the misplaced narrative and that his secret was safe. He'd return home from work expecting a relieved, slightly sheepish stepson, not one who was secretly plotting his exposure. The real trap would be set for Friday afternoon after my interview. I would request a special family dinner to celebrate. I'd frame it as a thank you to them for their support and also as a chance to discuss my future plans now that the interview is done. The celebratory atmosphere would make him feel secure, even triumphant, believing his plan had failed but that he remained undiscovered. At that dinner, I would guide the conversation to his concerns about my future. "I need to record eyes. I said to Maya the whole conversation. "My thoughts exactly," she replied. "Your phone is good, but the placement is tricky. He might see it. I have something better." An hour later, she was at my door with a small, innocuous-looking device. It was a USB power adapter with a hidden pinhole camera and microphone. It was undetectable. "Plug it into an outlet with a clear view of the dinner table," she instructed. "It records high-quality audio and video directly to a micro SD card. He'll never know." I did as she instructed, setting it up in the dining room outlet that gave a perfect view of the head of the table, Mark's seat. The trap was set. When Mark got home that evening, I played my part perfectly. I was putting my notes away when he came to my door. "Heard you found the passport," he said, that same gruff, unreadable expression on his face. "Yeah," I said, forcing a casual tone. "You were right. It must have fallen behind my dresser when I was organizing things. I feel like an idiot for panicking so much." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "Told you it would turn up when you stopped looking," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. The gesture, which was meant to be paternal, felt grotesque. He thought he was off the hook. He thought I was a fool. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to flinch away from his touch. My mom was just relieved the crisis was over. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, hugging me tightly. "I was so worried. Now you can focus on your interview." Her innocence was the most painful part of the deception. She had no idea she was living with a saboteur. That night, I barely slept. It wasn't because of nerves about the interview anymore. I knew my material inside and out. It was the anticipation of the confrontation to come. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle deep in my bones. Mark had treated me like a child, trying to manipulate my life from the shadows. I was about to show him that I was not a child anymore. I was going to beat him at his own game, not with brute force but with intelligence, strategy, and the one thing he'd underestimated, my unwavering determination to follow my dream. The countermove was in motion. All I had to do now was perform on 2 different stages, first for the fellowship panel and second for my family. And I had no intention of failing either one. Friday morning, the interview was flawless. The moment they asked for my passport, I held it up to the camera with a steady hand, the small act feeling like a monumental victory. I answered their questions with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. My passion for aerospace engineering, sharpened by the silent battle I was fighting, came through in every word. When the call ended, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. I had done it. I had overcome the obstacle he had placed in my path. Now it was time for the main event. I spent the afternoon helping my mom prepare for the celebratory dinner. She was happy, humming around the kitchen, believing this was a genuinely joyous occasion. The duality of it all was sickening. Her joy was predicated on a lie, a carefully constructed stage for a drama she didn't even know she was a part of. Mark came home in a good mood. He'd heard from my mom that the interview went well and he played the part of the proud stepfather convincingly. "Attaboy, Jason," he said, giving me another one of his heavy-handed pats on the back. "See, nothing to worry about," he was smug. He believed that even though I'd found the passport, the seed of doubt he'd planted about my future would eventually take root. He still thought he could win the war. We sat down for dinner. The hidden camera in the power adapter had a perfect, unobstructed view of the table. My heart was a steady drum in my chest. I started with small talk, letting the comfortable rhythm of a normal family meal settle in. I talked about the interview, the kinds of questions they asked, and my hopes for the outcome. "Well, even if this Germany thing doesn't work out," Mark began, taking a large bite of roast chicken, "it's good experience. There are plenty of great opportunities right here. That job at Henderson is still open." This was my opening. "You know, Mark," I said, my voice calm and measured, "I've been thinking a lot about what you've said about me staying local." He visibly brightened, leaning forward slightly. "Good, it's a smart move. You build a life where your roots are." "I was just wondering why it's so important to you that I stay," I continued, looking him directly in the eye. "Is it because you're worried I'll fail out there?" "It's not about failure," he said, his tone becoming paternal and lecturing. "It's about being realistic. This aerospace stuff is a pipe dream. Life isn't about pipe dreams, it's about a steady paycheck, a house, a family. I just want what's best for you." My mom nodded along. "He's right, sweetie, we just worry." "So you were." "Rise so much," I said, keeping my voice even, "that you'd be willing to intervene, to make sure I choose the right path." Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. He sensed a shift in the conversation but couldn't pinpoint it yet. "I don't know what you mean by intervene. I give you advice, that's what a father does." I took a slow breath. It was time. "Where were you on Wednesday night, Mark?" The question hung in the air. He was visibly confused. "What? I was here, we had dinner, why?" "And Thursday morning, when I was tearing my room apart, you didn't seem very concerned," I said. "You just said it would turn up." "Because it usually does," he said defensively, his voice losing its confident edge. "You were panicking over nothing." My mom looked back and forth between us, her brow furrowed with confusion. "Jason, what is this about?" I ignored her, my focus entirely on Mark. "It's funny though, because it didn't just turn up, I found it in a very specific place." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brochure for North Ridge Community College. I placed it on the table between us. Mark's face went pale. He stared at the brochure as if it were a venomous snake. "I found it tucked inside this," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm. "In the side pocket of your golf bag." The silence that followed was absolute. My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Mark's facade completely crumbled. The color drained from his face, replaced by a blotchy red. He looked from the brochure to me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in my naivete, that he had no defense prepared. He was caught. You went through my things," he finally stammered, latching onto the only defense he could muster. "You sabotaged my future," I shot back, my voice finally cracking with the fury I had suppressed for 2 days. "You stole my passport the day before the most important interview of my life and hid it. You did that to me, your stepson." "I was trying to protect you," he roared, slamming his fist on the table. The dishes rattled. "Protect you from disappointment, from chasing some fantasy halfway across the world and ending up with nothing. Protect me or control me." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You didn't do this for me, Mark. You did this for you. You can't stand the idea of me succeeding in a world you don't understand. You wanted me to fail so you could feel right." My mom was openly crying now, her face a mask of horror and disbelief, as she finally saw the man she married for who he truly was. "Mark, is this true? Did you do this?" He looked at her, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "I did what I thought was best. He's a kid, he doesn't know what he wants." "I am 21 years old," I yelled. "And I have known what I want since I was 8. The only thing I didn't know was that the biggest obstacle in my life wasn't gravity or physics, it was you." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I looked directly at the hidden camera, then back at him. "And the worst part for you, Mark, is that you failed. I had my interview, and I am going to get that fellowship. And I am going to leave this town, and I am going to leave you behind, and everyone is going to know exactly why." I turned and walked out of the dining room, leaving him sitting there, exposed and defeated, in the wreckage of the family dinner he thought he was controlling. The unveiling was complete. The aftermath of the dinner was a quiet explosion that fractured our family. Mark didn't try to apologize, he doubled down. He stormed out of the house that night, shouting that he was the victim, that his privacy had been invaded by an ungrateful stepson who didn't appreciate all he'd done for him. It was a classic narcissist's defense. When caught, pivot to your own perceived injustices. But the proof was too damning, his confession too clear. My mom, for the first time in their marriage, didn't soothe him or make excuses. She just sat at the table in stunned, horrified silence. The next day, I sat her down and showed her the video from the hidden camera. She watched the entire thing without a word, tears streaming down her face. Seeing Mark's cold, calculated deception and hearing his self-serving justifications, stripped of any ambiguity, broke through years of denial. She saw that this wasn't an isolated incident or a misguided mistake. It was the culmination of a long, subtle campaign of control. Their marriage ended not with a bang but with a quiet, somber packing of boxes. Mark moved out a week later. The house felt strangely large and empty without his loud, overbearing presence. It was a difficult time for my mom, but I also saw a strength in her that I hadn't seen before. The illusion she had been living in was shattered, and in its place she began to build something new, something based on a difficult truth rather than a comfortable lie. Our own relationship began to heal too. We started talking, really talking about my dad, about her grief, and about how she had allowed Mark's influence to grow so large. It was painful, but it was honest. 2 weeks after the interview, I received an email. The subject line read, "Congratulations from the Sterling Fellowship." My breath caught in my throat. I had gotten it, a full ride, a research position, everything I had ever dreamed of. I read the email 3 times just to be sure it was real. The wave of joy and relief was so powerful it brought me to my knees. I had won. Despite the sabotage, despite the emotional turmoil, I had won. When I told my mom, she hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered, and for the first time, hearing his name didn't just feel like a memory. It felt like a connection to the future he would have wanted for me. Maya, of course, was ecstatic. We celebrated with cheap pizza and expensive dreams, talking for hours about Germany, about her plans for her own tech startup, about a future that suddenly felt wide open and limitless. "You didn't just get a scholarship, Jason," she said, raising her soda can in a toast. "You got your freedom." She was right. The months leading up to my departure were a whirlwind of paperwork, packing, and preparation. But it was more than just a logistical exercise. It was a process of untangling myself from the life Mark had tried to trap me in. I sold the old car he had insisted I buy, good, reliable, local, and used the money for my plane ticket. I packed my books and schematics, the symbols of my true passion. I spent time with my mom, not as a child needing her buffer, but as an adult supporting her through her own transition. The day I left for Germany, my mom and Maya came to the airport. The goodbyes were emotional but not sad. They were full of hope. As I walked toward the gate, I looked back at them, 2 strong, brilliant women who had been my true support system all along. I never saw Mark again. I heard through the grapevine that his construction business had taken a hit. Word gets around in a small town, and while I never shared the video with anyone but my mom, the story of his deception somehow leaked out in bits and pieces. People who had once respected him as a solid, no-nonsense guy now looked at him differently. His authority, which was built on a carefully crafted image of paternal strength, had been exposed as petty tyranny. He had tried to anchor me to his small world, and in doing so had ended up adrift in it himself. My new life in Germany was everything I had hoped for and more. I was surrounded by people who shared my passion, who spoke the language of physics and orbital mechanics. I was challenged, I was inspired, and for the first time I felt completely and utterly at home. Sometimes, late at night in the university's observatory while looking up at the vast, star-dusted canvas of space, I think about that small, dark blue passport. It was just a booklet of paper and ink, but it had become the catalyst for my entire life's new trajectory. Mark had tried to use it to end my dream, but instead, he had inadvertently given me the one thing I needed most, the clarity and resolve to fight for it. He meant to ground me, but all he did was give me the perfect reason to fly.